Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Changing the Narrative, which is a series of public dialogues and conversations on various topics that are important to society and culture and to Tulsa. Okay, now I had to start again. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Changing the Narrative, a discussion series about topics relevant to race, class, and beyond. The series is sponsored by the Center for Truth for Racial Healing, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation at OSU-Tulsa, along with our sister centers, the Center for Public Life, the Center for Family Resilience, and the Center for Africana Studies. My name is Professor Quresh Ali Lansana. You all may call me Q. And we are happy to engage in a very important discussion with these young minds about race, about racism in the city, in their schools, in this country, and how it affects them, and what are things that we can do to change the narrative regarding race, so we can help make this world a better place for these young folks to take over, because we are old and we will be gone soon, and they will inherit this place. And so it's important that we always hear from young people, and because they have voices and minds and ideas, and they will inherit this world. So I'm very happy to be reunited with two friends, educators that I've known for a while, and they will introduce the students that they brought along with them. So first, let's hear from Ms. Linda Felstein. Linda, why don't you tell us where you're representing and introduce your students?
Thank you, Dr. Q. So it is my great pleasure to be part of this session with two of my students I represent, and they represent Union High School. And so I have Ramadan Gordani, who is participating today. He is a junior on this program. And then I also have Rodney, aka Lee Edens, and he is actually a senior at our high school, and he is here to speak his truth. I should say both of them are here to speak their truths. And so thank you for allowing us this opportunity to be here today.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here. And then Whitney Udwin, please, from Holland Hall, please introduce yourself and your crew.
I am very proud to introduce our two students. We have junior Olivia Abdallah and senior Gunnar Angst. And these are two students who are both very engaged in discussions of inclusivity and also just generally leadership at the school. And so yes, thank you for having us.
Well, thank you, Gunnar and Olivia and Rodney and Ramadan, for being here. This is, again, as I mentioned prior to our going live, this is about you all speaking your minds and your truths about race and racial equity, where you live, where you go to school, and in this world. So we are thankful to hear from you. So let's jump in. So what is your definition of racial equity? What does that mean to you, right? Rodney, you want to start? You have to unmute, nephew.
I think racial equity is just like where like people just like treated differently just on like race. And like,
I'm sorry, did you complete your thought?
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to jump in on that? Those are two words, racial and equity, that are often put together in a phrase, right? But what does it mean? Ramadan, what are you thinking? What does it mean?
I think racial equity is more like racial compensation in a way. Like one race, basically, the way they were treated before being compensated for that and by being treated more fairly. That's what I think racial equity means.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ramadan. And before we move on, Alvin just joined us. Alvin, tell us where you go to school and your grade level.
I go to Booker T. I'm in 12th grade. I'm happy to be here.
We are happy you joined us, Alvin. Thank you for being here as well. So we're talking about what racial equity means. So Olivia, what do you think? What are those words? Are there, can you give us any examples perhaps that you've experienced or what you think racial equity should be?
I personally think that racial equity is equality amongst all races, and that there's consistency in that. However, I don't think that's always practiced in our modern day. So in an ideal world, it would be consistent equality amongst all races.
Okay. We're going to piggyback on that too. Gunnar, what are your thoughts on that?
It's going to be really hard to top everyone that's gone before me. But from racial equity, I believe that it's just like an acknowledgement of like people of color, like Olivia said, like just making sure that, I mean, it's hard because I think my definition of racial equity and racial equality kind of like mixed together, but I know I have to like try to tell myself that they are like two different things, because like racial equality is like, oh, making sure that everyone is equal. But from like doing my research and talking to people, I've just known like the best way I can like describe it is that racial equity, I think, is just acknowledging like people of color and like compensating for like what their accomplishments and making sure that they are acknowledged.
Those are great answers. I mean, that compensation part is interesting to me. We're going to circle back to that in a moment. But so let me ask you though, as a sort of a natural follow-up to that question, do you feel like racism or segregation or discrimination exists in your school? And if so, how so? How does it manifest in your particular schools? Anyone want to start? Okay, am I going to have to call on someone? So Alvin, you just joined us. First of all, do you think racism, discrimination, or segregation exists in your school? Yes or no?
I think that yes. Personally, I think it exists everywhere in like our day-to-day lives, but I think at Booker T, especially the administration and staff has done like a pretty good job at making sure that students know not to like tolerate that kind of behavior. At Booker T, being a historically Black school, we kind of just have this legacy of appreciating Black culture and knowing where it comes from and sort of like respecting it in that way.
Okay. Thank you for that, Alvin. Who wants to go next? Does it exist in your school? If so, yes, no? If so, how? Go ahead.
I can go. I think particularly at Holland Hall, it's a very complex and gray area. I think we do a pretty fair job of making sure that everyone at some point has the means and resources to integrate and mingle with each other. However, with life for students who have been here since like they're 3, it's like hard to kind of break those cliquey type of relationships. But also if you are a student of color and you're heavily involved in the athletic department, it is a lot easier for you to have space and just have the opportunity to meet a lot and like actually be friends and have genuine relationships with a lot of the people in your class. But if you're not, that is a situation where you will kind of be segregated out of the mix with your peers.
What do you think about that, Gunnar?
Well, I said this last year, and I'm always going to like talk about my experience at Holland Hall. Like it is very much a bubble where like it is like literally its own community, and people who have been here for a while are very like attached to that community. And kind of like talking about what Alvin said, like Holland Hall, like personally, I don't think is exposed to enough Black culture at all. I feel like people trying to make sure like I just don't want to like disrespect my school, but I also want to be honest about it, because like racism happens at this school, and I feel like sometimes it is tolerated, but I know that the administration does its best, but I just don't think that unless people are put into situations where they are witnessing Black culture or have been through like the white narrative and the white perspective their whole lives, then it's going to be like a natural tendency. And I feel like since there are predominantly white students here, I feel like the white narrative is very like present here.
Okay. Lee, what do you think?
I think it do exist in schools. Like, I had a friend in my class one time, and like the teacher would like never help him. He was a white teacher, and like he was a Black student, and he would like never get help and stuff. So I would have to like go over there and help him. And it just like, I feel like they try to like do something only like if it like matters, like if it's something big. I feel like that's when they try to like do something.
What do you mean by big? What does that mean?
All right, like I feel like if a teacher like say like the N-word or something, like I feel like they'll do something like that, but like nothing like small.
So let's roll on that for a second. So when those small things, Lee, are often referred to as microaggressions, right? You've probably all heard that term before. Although I don't believe personally that any aggression is micro. If it bothers you, it's an aggression, right? It could be the level of which it affects one, right? But I don't believe that there's a microaggression. I believe all things are there. There are aggressions, right? It's how one chooses to address them or not, right? So what Lee is saying is that those small things that, you know, sometimes folks acknowledge, sometimes you don't take to a teacher or an administrator, right? So like, how often do those small things, do you run across those kind of small aggressions, if you will, in your day-to-day going to school? Does that make sense?
In my day-to-day?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask, the question's for everyone, but yeah, go ahead.
I feel like it's like some days it's more than others. Sometimes it might not be none, but sometimes it might be a lot. It just depends.
Okay.
I also think that a deciding factor in how often I experience those aggressions depend on what's also going on in the news cycle. Or like just what's going on like in pop culture, different things like that. So like if there's maybe a new TikTok trend, or there's a new song out, like that's when I tend to see it. I also know like one thing that particularly just for me, I don't know what it is about it that just gets under my skin that I see enough of at Holland Hall is when white boys tend to wear do-rags. And a lot of the time it's like it's other Black boys giving white boys do-rags. So it's kind of like our community is taking part in that. But it's just, it does something for me where it really just gets under my skin. And I don't know what it is about it, but it takes me to a place.
We understand. Ramadan, what are you thinking?
A microaggression?
Well, like small sort of things that sort of happen, thinking about what Lee just said. Not necessarily big things, but kind of small things that happen on your on a day-to-day or week-to-week kind of situation.
To be honest, I think everyone is racially profiled in a way, but obviously nobody's going to admit it. Like you see on a lot of pop culture, for example, let me just throw a random example out there. You always see a Black guy with a white woman. I mean, usually always see that. There's nothing wrong with that, but you rarely see any black relationships, you know, strong Black relationships. They always like to focus on the negatives. And that could be an example. There's a lot of examples of that. And honestly, I think we should work to change that.
And what kind of work do you think would be involved? This is not just for Ramadan, but everyone. What kind of work do you think needs to be engaged to change that?
I think we need to promote like more Black people in like TV shows and movies and stuff.
Okay.
Going off of what Lee said, I think promoting healthy Black relationships in pop culture and like our day-to-day lives. Because as of now, I mean, as per what I've seen, you know, Black relationships kind of had like are stigmatized around like sort of like living in the projects and like the low tax bracket type of, you know, living. So I think a representation of like a healthy Black relationship would sort of help to like alleviate the problems that come with that.
Okay, those are great answers. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I personally would like to add something to that. I think also in doing so, the mindset of Black people need to change. Because I cannot count the amount of times where I've had a Black boy tell me, "You sound like a white girl." And I'm like, thanks. That made me feel so much better. But I feel like that like whole narrative of like what's white and what's Black really needs to shift. And then also like I personally have a lot of white friends just because of where I go to school and where I live. And so like going out about and then like seeing how other Black people react to that dynamic makes me it makes it very difficult to interact, because it's like I'm just living the lifestyle that I've been given, and like I feel for you, but at the same time it's like it shouldn't matter, you know what I'm saying? It should not matter.
You just brought up something really interesting, Olivia. I mean, all of you did, but that's really interesting. So if I heard you correctly, what you just said is that other Black folks have responded to you differently or negatively when you've been rolling with your white friends. Is that what you just said?
Correct, especially when it's white boys. When it's white boys, and especially like the aunties and me sideways, where I'm like, okay.
You cut out the last part of that, Olivia. I think we lost you.
Oh, I didn't have anything else to say. My bad.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I want to hear from other folks on this panel regarding what Olivia just said. Do you feel like, I mean, because that would be what we'd call, right, a bias, right? Perhaps an implicit bias, right? Lee, you were going to say something?
I just think that goes on like under racial profiling. Like they expect Black people to act a certain way and expect white people to act a certain way. And if they don't, then you're just not Black or you're not white.
Okay.
Personally, I've gone through the exact same thing that Olivia was explaining. Being told I sound like a white boy, and at times even being called like a sellout for hanging out with like predominantly white friends. And I think it's sort of the idea that pretty much like all sides have of how you should be acting based on how you look. I think that's sort of like an archaic way to look at it, because the age that we're in now, you shouldn't have to rely on like categories or labels to live your everyday life. But we still do. And that's, I think, one of the things that could really change from, you know, the mindset that Olivia was talking about, is the categorization and the way we think about, you know, certain like racial roles in society.
That's interesting. Ramadan, Gunnar, what are y'all thinking about regarding to what Olivia just said and what Alvin just said there, and Lee?
I can go.
Go ahead.
I know, like, for being white, like, I've always like tried to talk to like people and like family members like about like issues like this and everything, and like even though like they don't understand like where I'm coming from or how it matters, they do understand the point that they would rather be white than be Black. And I feel like, I think like especially with like when white people like see like their family members or people that they know like being friends with like Black people or dating Black people, I feel like they don't want that from them, or like they have this like bias because like in our society like Black is deemed as less than, and if you're associating with that, then you're obviously or going to be like deemed as less than or not upholding the white standard.
Wow, that's powerful. Wow. Ramadan, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that no race should be ashamed of who they are, honestly. And to have all these labels for certain races just brings us back in time when slavery was a thing and we had a whole bunch of labels for Black people and all. And we shouldn't be still living in the 17th century. This is the 21st century, still experiencing racism to this day.
Mm-hmm. But you're right. But what you all are saying, right, is that, like, to use Olivia's example, that she's hanging out with white folks. So there are Black folks who think that there's something wrong with her, or she's not Black enough, right? Even President Obama was considered not Black enough at one point, right? And then to what Gunner's point, which is also something that's real, right, is that there are folks, white and Black, but in his context, white folks who feel like you were lowering your standards, right, by rolling with this Black dude or this young Black woman, right? That stuff still exists, is what you all are saying to me, right? Even though, as you said, it's 17th century, right, Ramadan, but it's 2022, and that stuff's still real, right? How do we overcome such thing? But what do we need to? What kind of work in which do we need to be engaging to flip that narrative? If it's just as real for you all right now as it was for me in high school in the early 80s, right? And thinking about the fact that we just observed the centennial of the Tulsa race massacre, right? That's real too. What do we do? What needs to be done to flip this script, y'all?
Well, first we got to get
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, first we got to get out of our own way and not be afraid of who we are, express ourselves the way we want to express ourselves. And if we see someone being treated unfairly, we got to stand up for them instead of just staying on the sidelines and then just saying this is wrong. We need to take action.
Okay, good. Alvin, go ahead.
I think along with the, shameless expression that Ramadan was talking about, the problem lies with education. And I think this kind of lies with one of the questions that you're going to ask, the difference between racism and prejudice. Racism is manufactured, it's taught, but prejudice is innate. So when you look at how to change this, it's with education. A lot of the schools now are just starting to integrate educating about the Tulsa race massacre and what happened in 1921 in Tulsa. But I think that's in a way not enough. It sort of needs to be teach, what is this behavior? What can you expect from this behavior, and how to now deter this behavior from your friends, family, people that you meet, such and such like that.
Okay, I think we just lost Olivia. I hope she comes back. Lee, what are you thinking? Lee Gunner.
I feel like the education thing is good, and because we only really learn about the same Black people every year. They might just add up to it, like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, all the other people. We don't really learn about them. So I just feel like they should just put more Black history in the history.
Yeah. Okay, Gunner, what are you thinking?
I liked what Alvin said, because I do think education needs to be more professional and in a deeper understanding, because we all know it is taught since we were young that slavery happened, Blacks were treated horribly, but I think we need to talk about why do we feel as people that this needed to happen, or what was their mindset. And I think just talk more about this and how I think, especially at a young age for children, teaching that this behavior is not okay, and how we can lead on from then.
Right. Okay. I mean, let's spend some time on education for a minute, right? Because to your point, I grew up in a sad little town called Enid. I guess I have to stop calling it sad, but it was a sad little town called Enid. I had Oklahoma history class in 8th grade, 9th grade, just like you, all. And the massacre, or forget the massacre. Well, you won't say forget the massacre, but think about the fact, not only was the massacre not taught, right, but what Greenwood was before it was destroyed. The wealthiest Black community in the country, right, is also not taught. So what Black folks built, right, and then its destruction, right, was not taught until just a few years ago prior to the centennial, right? So that's over 100 years of not folks, by design, folks not possessing this knowledge unless you had a teacher who taught it or a family member who taught it to you, or you got that knowledge from somewhere outside of K-12 public education in the state. That was not knowledge we were privy to, which brings to mind, right? If we all have, gone through K-12 education in this state, right, and there are textbooks, then we know what is privileged in those textbooks. What's not in those textbooks, right, we don't know. All of us, all ethnicities, all genders, all sexual orientations. If it's not taught, then generally, unless you go out and find that information, then you just have that ignorance, right? So to that end, about education is the key to this change for you all?
I think a different way of educating could be, the key to it. For example, a few months ago, I went to a ballet that was centered around the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I think with education, you learn information, not emotions. You learn hard, concrete facts and not really like that level of like experience or the sort of like the trauma that comes from that experience. But from the ballet, it was really interesting to see, how they interpreted these emotions and these experiences through like their dance. Mm-hmm. And before the ballet, I went to the lady who put it on, the curator. I went to one of the meetings that she had before, mm-hmm. and you could see how raw her emotions were about this. She hadn't experienced it herself, but she had talked to multiple people who were there and people who had parents and grandparents who had experienced that. And just from talking to them, you can see just how much like raw passion she had about this topic. And that's something that, we didn't learn in Oklahoma history. Mm-hmm. And as you said, we wouldn't learn unless we went out there and sort of like sought it out for ourselves. So I think, adding like the aspect of emotion and like comprehending the feelings and experiences that went on at that time, and not just at that time, all throughout segregation as well, could sort of like add the needed layer to what we already know.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to that? It was well said, Alvin. Anyone else want to speak to that? Go ahead, Ramadan.
Well, I just want to say that I feel like everybody knows the history, Black history, but they just don't want to acknowledge it. Like there's tons of Black history out there, like a lot of Black history, but yeah, we only get Black history to the 19th century to now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of hidden history, and I feel like we should dig it up more. But that's the one thing they won't ever teach in schools, how Blacks were excellent, but they want to teach how they were slaves.
Yeah, well said, right? I mean, I'm here at OSU Tulsa where I'm on faculty, right? And I've been in higher education for decades. But one of the things about even at the collegiate level, right, is that African American studies or Africana studies is an elective, right? AAPI studies is an elective, right? Latinx studies is an elective. It's not required, right? Which means what? that if you want to pursue the knowledge, you can go pursue the knowledge. But in the general US history course, right, or the history courses, you get what Ramadan's speaking to, right? You don't get the depth, right? Or you're not introduced to Black excellence, as you said, or AAPI excellence or Latinx excellence, you know what I mean? Until it's required, right? Until it's required learning, which, why isn't it required learning?
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I personally think I have an interesting perspective on this because my dad is an immigrant from the continent of Africa. My dad is from Sudan, so I'm Sudanese. And so I always grew up knowing that like my people were geniuses and that we built pyramids in our country, that we had established math and literature in our country, that we were to grow up knowing and learning multiple different languages at the same time. So I knew like where I came from. I knew that my people were smart and that we were not just slaves coming here. However, my mom is African American, so her people came through as slaves, and then she's also Native American. And so I feel like the main reason why it's not taught is because the moment that an oppressed group of people learn who they truly are, they gain power. Because the saying is knowledge is power, and that it could not be more true. And so when you understand that your history did not start off of oppression, and that you weren't always these people in chains and shackles, then you have a lot more just empowerment of who you are and what you could be, and that you can return to what you started off as.
Okay, Olivia, well said. Who was going to jump in? Was that one of y'all? Was it
that was me.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that this is the part of the reason that a lot of Black people like don't know who they are. For example, you got them with their pants sagging, doing a whole bunch of stuff like that because they don't know that what they really are. They're still in that slave mentality. Yeah, they're not acting like a king or queen. They're acting like slaves still.
What do you think, Lee?
I honestly think that like it should be. I feel like we'll just like find ourselves like they were saying, and like I don't know. That was just hard to talk. Everybody just explained everything, but I feel like we'll just find ourselves and like we can go on from there, and like less people will be going like jail and stuff and be like interested in actually learning because it's about like what we did in the past.
Right. Well, it's interesting to think about what you said, Ramadan, too, and then I want to hear from Gunnar. That, you know, I spent 28 years on the south side of Chi, so I've seen some things, right? But to think about that in terms and what you just said, right? That folks who are perhaps engaged in street business and street entrepreneurship, right, are, in your words, perpetuating sort of a slave mentality. When you think about also at the same time, right, that there are so few resources, say in North Tulsa, right, for folks to be able to, you can see, you know, the gangsta on the corner, you know, in fresh gear and some new kicks with a wad of money, right, but don't see necessarily the attorney or professor, right, in the hood. And so, and it's easy, the lure of that fast money is easy and it's there, but it's also, right, apart because of the lack of resources and opportunity in the communities as well, right, in the hood as well, which has to do with government and also has to do with private, you know, private enterprises or businesses, or, you know, and us too, right, investing in our own communities, you know what I mean? What does, well, I'm going to get to this question before we jump off of education. But Gunnar, did you have anything to add before I go to this question from a panelist?
I mean, I was just going to reiterate just what Olivia was saying. Like, to me, is like, it's a power dynamic from like starting at like a young age, like history. Like, I feel like all like Black students just know that they like their ancestors were just slaves. And the reason why like I feel like white people just don't want to seek this information is because they don't want to be told that like, oh, they're racist, you're a colonizer, you've done all this like horrible things. And they don't, because I feel like people like feel like if a white person goes to like an African American studies class, then they're just gonna sit there and feel like they're being like degraded the whole time. When in reality, like I'm actually in African American studies here at Holland Hall. It's really not. Like our whole like lesson plan is learning about like Black joy and like the importance of that, and like how like it has like thrived over like generations of like the Black community.
Good, very good, very good. So to that point, Gunnar, we have a question from Lydia. Hi, Lydia. And this question is, what systems of support can your school provide for you? Are there any intentional spaces to share your experiences? So what system of support does your school provide, or can your school provide?
So at Booker T, we have a few clubs centered around like Black culture and Black excellence. Personally, I used to be on a podcast called Morning Tea with Booker T that talked about, you know, sort of like the background of Black culture and where it came from, and you know, where racism stands today. And we also have another club, African American Society, and those are places where you can go as a Black person, or really as any person, and sort of share your experiences around your life and what you've dealt with racism and prejudice and discrimination and such things like that.
Okay, thank you, Alvin. Who's next? Other systems of support your school provides you can speak on?
I can go. I personally feel like the one space that African American students had at Holland Hall was taken away, mostly in part due to COVID. So like we needed to have, there was a space called the Black Hole. And so there was a lot of controversy around the Black Hole. Is like, was this racist to call the space where all the Black kids were the Black Hole? Is that racist or whatever? We referred to it as the Black Hole. And so that's where we used to be and just would chill. I remember it vividly my freshman year. And then COVID hit. And so my sophomore year coming back, that space had been turned into a classroom. Mm. And so it was a matter of like, okay, we're just going to be pushed back into these predominantly white spaces again. And it was actually really hard because we, as a Black community, drifted apart from one another because that was our space. Like that's where we would go during our free time just to communicate, laugh, joke, do homework together. And so when that space was removed, it was like, well, dang, like we didn't have any other space on campus. You took the one space that we had, and so we mostly just remain in the commons now, but I know a lot of other African American students were like, that took a hard hit. Like that was hard for us.
Okay. Thank you for that. Lee, you got anything on this?
We do have clubs and stuff, but like personally me, I didn't join them, but they do have them. Like they got stuff for Asians, all racial stuff they have.
Is there any particular reason why you didn't join? Just any particular reason, or are you just busy?
Me, it's because I have to work.
Okay.
Maybe after school and stuff, and I work after school.
Okay, that's real. That's real. Okay. Gunnar, Ramadan, on this topic, anything to add?
Well, we have the African Diaspora Student Association, where we recognize Black excellence and then learn more about Black history than they teach us in school.
Okay, good.
We have our like Holland Hall has like an affinity group, and I know the instructors who like coordinate that very well. I don't really know, like I've never heard like any like bad comments, but I haven't heard any like good comments. But I do feel like even I knew like what the Black hole was, and like I knew that was like very precious and like domain that was used for the Black community, and I feel like that was like the best that we had, and like it got taken away because of COVID.
Okay, well, to that end, y'all, what suggestions would you offer your school administrators to improve racial inequities at your school? What would, if you could throw some things out at your school leaders, school managers, what would you do? Go ahead, Ramadan.
Well, I would just tell the administrators to recognize representation, basically. Let her create our own spaces, probably student ran. That way we can actually know what we want in the school, actually know what inclusion we need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, instead of schools always suppressing different cultures based on body types and all.
Yeah, I think going off of what Ramadan said, creating spaces where it's more so student representation instead of like, you know, admin controlled. Because a lot of times, I think some of you can relate, it's harder to express yourself when there's an adult in the room, but when it's, you know, all of us, it's easier to, you know, get out maybe some of the qualms that you might have with your school, or you talk about maybe things that aren't, you know, safe for a teacher to hear that, you know, like you have problems with, you know. So I think it's more so creating spaces that students control, not spaces that, you know, admin or teachers control.
Okay. Who wants to add anything?
I think also taking, even though microaggressions are just like regular aggressions, I think Holland Hall personally needs to do a better job of handling those situations, and just not letting it result into awkward silence or radio silence altogether. I know personally, just dealing with microaggressions is kind of like a regular thing for me. And it literally just depends on what's going on in the world or what's going on in our small little bubble, depending on how frequent those aggressions are. But like actually handling those head on, having conversation with faculty and students as well, I think would really be beneficial. And then people actually getting like disciplinary action taken. A lot of schools don't have the issue of money being involved. Holland Hall is a private school, and so I feel like a lot of the times it is sometimes money that controls those decisions. So not allowing how much money someone has determine the repercussions of their actions would be nice.
Noted and duly noted. Gunnar, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, because at Holland Hall we have this thing called Honor Council, where if it's like student run with like obviously like faculty involved, but like if a student gets in trouble, then that is where they get sent. But from what I know, that this year there is only like one student of color on Honor Council this year, so I feel like, and it's all like male too, and so I feel like that just like limits like the perspective on how like certain situations need to be dealt with, or like how like letting their personal like biases like getting involved and everything like that.
Okay, good. Anyone have had anything else to add on that particular question or topic? Okay, so we have about 12 minutes left, so I'm going to get a couple more questions in and also give you all a chance to sort of close with your own thoughts. So let me ask you this, right? And we sort of touched on this in a sort of peripheral way, but I want to go right in. Do you believe people harbor a stigma or fear about North Tulsa, East Tulsa, or West Tulsa? If so, what constitutes that stigma or that fear?
I personally think a lot of just students at Holland Hall have a stigma about North Tulsa, more so of like that a lot of the Black students in the student body who attend Holland Hall live in North Tulsa, and that isn't necessarily the case. I also think that there is this fear of what actually happens in North Tulsa. I think there's also a lot of confusion, which just causes people to be like, I would rather not just go down there. But I just feel like people think it's a violent space where Black people live, and that is not necessarily true. But I feel like the lack of whiteness in that space creates that fear, because it's like, it's what we go through every day. It's living in a white space. Black people who operate in white spaces on a regular basis, I personally believe, know white people better than white people know themselves. And when you have white people going into a space that they don't necessarily own or are comfortable with, they're faced to do something that they've never done in their entire life, which is actually know the truth about Black people. Where Black people operating in that opposite space have been basically bred since the beginning of time to know how to deal and operate in that space.
Wow, that was powerful. Who wants to jump on that, add more to that?
I think I can say for myself that going to school in North Tulsa it changes your perspective about North Tulsa. Going off of what Olivia said, there's the stigmatism of like gang violence and just overall violence and like crime happening in North Tulsa, but it's very far from the truth. I have multiple friends that walk home that live in North Tulsa from Booker T to their house. Personally, I have I've walked with my friends to their cars that are like far away. When I was on the cross country team, we ran 3 miles away from the school and 3 miles back, and I can tell you it is the safest I've ever felt. No different from anywhere else in town. So I think it's you have to experience it, and I think the students at Booker T have experienced the fact that you can be on the north side and not have to worry about your life. It's people live there just like anyone would live anywhere else. It's life. You go to work, you come back home, you rest, you do it all over again. There's nothing. There's no. It's no different. And I think people harbor truths that the north side or like all these different areas of Tulsa are different because it's like a majority of Black people. It's like minorities in general, but it's not. It's the same as everywhere else. And I think people have to realize that just because you look different, just because you make less, just because this isn't that, it doesn't mean that you're a dangerous person or your area code is it's not. It's really not. I mean, it's safe. It's a good place.
Thank you, Alvin. Who wants to chime in here? Go ahead.
I see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gunnar. You started and then Lee. Go ahead.
Sorry. But how I see it is like if you're so concerned about like being safe or whatever, like every day, like in our lives, like it's like anything could happen. Like we live in like a pandemic. You choose not to wear your mask. Anybody could come up to you, harm you. Like a natural disaster could happen. And I feel like the only reason why people are just so afraid to go to the north side is because like Blackness is just associated with that. And that's like scarier to them than more than like a natural disaster. And I feel like it's like hard for like white people to, they say that they're like happy in their place. Well, I see it as like they are uncomfortable and they're comfortable and they don't want to step out of those comfort zones. And it just really limits like our knowledge and how we view it, because without stepping out of our comfort zones, then we can never grow and experience and make these connections that this conversation and all of us are trying to do.
Thank you, Gunnar. Lee, go ahead.
Well, I feel like people look at it like by classes. I feel like they think like the north side, it's just like the lower class that like nobody want to visit, that they like gotta fight to live and stuff. And that's why they don't want to like go out there.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Olivia?
I would just like to say something really quick. I also think that when white people enter these predominantly Black spaces, it's very important not to gentrify it. I feel like we want white people to come into our space and understand us better, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. We need to be very careful that in allowing them to experience our culture and our spaces, that they are not taking it for themselves.
Okay. You're speaking to appropriation as well as sort of as gentrification, right? Like what is happening a couple blocks from me at Archer and Greenwood, right? Buildings being built that aren't owned by Black folks on Greenwood, right? Yeah, that's you make a good point. Ramadan, were you going to add something?
I mean, it's not. I mean, I wasn't really going to add anything because it's nothing new to me. It's just the same. We see a place with mostly Black people, they always assume, oh, it's the ghetto, it's the hood and all. But you just gotta see it to believe it. You know, shouldn't be assuming all the time, racially profiling a group of people.
Okay. Well, I know that I'm going to take away many things from this conversation, but one of the things that Gunnar just said has just really resonated, right? Blackness is scarier than a natural disaster. Like, that's a statement, right? That's a statement. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to give each of you, about a minute to share anything that we did not get to today that you'd like to discuss. So, Ramadan, you're my top right. So let's start with you. Anything you want to share that we didn't get to?
I mean, there weren't any questions that we didn't get to, but I just want to say something to everyone that's afraid of Black culture. I mean, I'm going to just say this: Black culture is a thing. You don't have to be afraid of our Blackness, because in reality, everybody's Black. Everybody came from Black people. You shouldn't be afraid of basically the creators. Like, I'm gonna just say it like that, because everybody's so afraid of Black culture that it angers me in a way. I just want people to recognize Black excellence. Basically, Blacks were never slaves, even though they were slaves, but they were never slaves. They were always kings and queens that came from Africa, basically.
Okay, folks, there's not a people on the planet that hasn't been enslaved. Not a person, not an ethnicity that hasn't been enslaved. You're right about that. Gunnar, your thoughts.
I mean, I just want to iterate the thought that white people shouldn't tolerate their uncomfortableness for, to not to be exposed to Black people. And I feel it gets so frustrating because we just need to talk to more people. We need to elevate Black voices. We need to elevate more Black queer voices. We just need to be exposed to more of these cultures and just make sure that we can connect with one another.
Very good, very good. Okay, thank you, Gunnar. Lee, where's your head?
Right here. I just gotta say that we just gotta honestly just keep moving forward, and Black people just need to stay together. Even we just need to find a way to get together if we're not together. Type.
Okay. Olivia.
I think my closing statement would be that on both sides of the party, we need to understand that Black people are complex, that we're multifaceted and multidimensional, that it is not a one-size-fits-all type of situation, and that we have lived and walked in all different types of lifestyles. And so putting us and compressing us into one box, it disproportionately affects everyone. And it doesn't allow us to push the narrative further, for further change, for further racial reconciliation. So I feel like keeping that in mind is very important in taking steps forward.
Thank you, Olivia. And Alvin.
I kind of just wanted to go off what Ramadan said about Black culture. Once you learn about Black culture, once you kind of integrate yourself into it, I think you'll find that it is one of the most welcoming things that you can find anywhere. we are a people of love. We are a people of expression. We love to dance. We love to sing. We love to do everything in the middle. And I think that once you introduce yourself to that world, you'll see, we're not the stigmas. We're not the stereotypes that you see on the media. We're so much more than that. And I think that's what people everywhere can learn, that we're more than our stigmas. We're more than what people lead us on to be.
Thank you, Alvin. And I will leave you with this quote, right, which is a quote that drives a great deal of my work here at OSU-Tulsa and beyond, right? It's a quote from Clara Luper, who was Oklahoma's most noted civil rights leader. In 2016, Ms. Luper said that my biggest job now is helping white people understand that Black history is white history. We cannot separate the two, right? Black folks didn't burn down their own homes in 1921 in Tulsa, right? White folks did that, but our histories are intertwined, right? So again, all of our histories are intertwined. So only folks who hope to benefit from separating them, right, in some crazy way, are the folks who attempt to separate them, right, to benefit by teaching or not teaching something, or not learning one thing or teaching another thing, right? So you all have been absolutely amazing. So Ramadan, Gunnar, Rodney, Lee, Alvin, and Olivia, you all have been absolutely brilliant. And I feel better about the world going forward because you all are in it, and you're thinking, and you're feeling, and you're doing, right? And again, Whitney and Linda and I, and Anjanette, we gonna get older. That's not gonna stop. And you all are gonna inherit this place, and you're gonna run this place. What do you want this place to be? And that you all are already thinking and feeling and working now on the world you want to see, the change you want to be is important. And Tulsa is very fortunate to have you. So thank you all very, very much for engaging in this important conversation on this National Day of Racial Healing. Thanks to all of you out there in cyber world who have hung out with these brilliant young minds for this hour with us. There will be another Changing the Narrative in February. And that will be led by Dr. Erica Townsend Bell, who is the director of the Center for Africana Studies here at OSU. And hopefully you will tune in, look out for notifications on that. Thank you all very, very, very much. Again, young, brilliant peoples, you have made my day, and hopefully made the days of many, many, many others. So with that, we will say thank you, and have a great day, and be woke every day, right? Not just on the National Day of Racial Healing, not just on King Day, but every day, be woke and stay woke. Peace, y'all. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.